Dear friends, English literature, Elizabethan and Jacobean drama, The Merchant of Venice by William Shakespeare. Brief questions with answers. Brief questions 1 to 50. Question 1. What do you mean by the title, The Merchant of Venice? And so the title means that the play is about the story of Antonio, who was the merchant of Venice. Question 2. Do you think that the title is satisfactory? Answer: yes, because Antonio is the lone protagonist and center of interest in the play. Question 3. Could any other title be suitable to the play? And so the play could have been titled as The Jew of Venice. Question 4. Why has not the play been titled The Jew of Venice? Answer: the Jew in the play has not played a positive role. Question 5. What kind of play is The Merchant of Venice? Answer: the Merchant of Venice is a romantic comedy. Question 6. Can The Merchant of Venice be called a tragicomedy? Answer: although there are some tragic scenes in the play, it can appropriately be called a romantic comedy. Question 7. How is The Merchant of Venice different from the classical comedy? Answer: in a classical comedy, there is no mixture of comic and tragic elements as it is found in The Merchant of Venice. Question 8. When was the play The Merchant of Venice written? Answer: most probably The Merchant of Venice was written sometime between 1596 and 1598. Question 9. Why can a certain date of composition not be fixed? Answer: because no authentic date is available in the records about it. Question 10. When was William Shakespeare born? Answer: William Shakespeare was born on the 23rd April 1564. Question 11. Where was Shakespeare born? Answer: Shakespeare was born in the village of Stratford-on-Avon. Question 12. What is Avon? Answer: Avon is the name of a small river on the bank of which the village Stratford stands. Question 13. Who is called the sweet swan of Avon? Answer: it is Shakespeare who is called the sweet swan of Avon. Question 14. Why is Shakespeare called the sweet swan of Avon? Answer: Shakespeare is so called because of his immortal creation in literature. Question 15. Mention Shakespeare's qualities as a dramatist or a playwright. Answer: impersonality, universality, and psychological study of human mind are Shakespeare's sterling qualities as a dramatist. Question 16. Where is the plot set? And so the plot is set partly in Venice and partly in Belmont in the continent. Question 17. What is Venice? Answer: Venice is an old city of historic importance in Italy. Question 18. What is Belmont? Answer: Belmont is a contiguous town to Venice in Italy, famous for her civilized culture. Question 19. How does The Merchant of Venice open? Answer: the drama The Merchant of Venice opens with a speech of Antonio in which he speaks of his melancholy. Question 20. What does Salerio say to his friend Antonio's sad observation about himself? Answer: Salerio answers that his mind perhaps is anxious about his ships which are sailing in the sea. Question 21. What does Solenio say to Antonio when he expresses his sadness in the opening scene? Answer: Solenio answers that Antonio thinks seriously of his ships with his merchandise. Question 22. Who is Bassanio? Answer: Bassanio is an intimate friend of Antonio and lucky beneficiary of his wealth and generosity. Question 23. Why does Bassanio go to Antonio in the opening scene of the play? Answer: Bassanio comes to his friend Antonio with a prayer to lend him money so that he can take part in the lottery to win Portia, the beautiful lady of Belmont. Question 24. What does Antonio say to Bassanio when Bassanio asks for a loan? Answer: Antonio asks Bassanio to raise a loan on his credit. Question 25. What is the agreement between Shylock and Antonio? Answer: Shylock will pay Antonio 3,000 ducats ducats on condition that Shylock will take a pound of flesh from any part of Antony's body in case of his failure to repay the loan in time. Question 26. Why does Portia lament to Nerissa? Answer: Portia is not free to marry according to her will because her father has laid down certain conditions in his will about her marriage. Question 27. How does Portia's father condition her marriage? Answer: Portia will have to marry the man who chooses rightly from among the 3 chests of gold, silver, and lead. Question 28. What was the attitude of Portia to the bond laid down by her father? Answer: although Portia was not certain that the right person would be able to choose the right chest, she decided to be obedient to her father's last wish. Question 29. Did Portia see Bassanio before the holding of the casket competition? Answer: yes, Portia saw Bassanio when he visited Belmont before her father's death. Question 30. How does Portia praise Bassanio? Answer: Portia praises him to be the best of all who deserve a fair lady. Question 31. Why does Shylock hate Antonio? Answer: Shylock hates Antonio because he is a Christian and lends money to people without charging excessive interest. Question 32. What was the accusation of Shylock against Antonio? Answer: Shylock accuses Antonio of having repeatedly spit upon him and calling him a dog. Question 33. Why did Shylock say when Antonio wanted a loan from him? Answer: Shylock offered a loan to Antonio to gain his friendship without charging any interest but with a penalty clause. Question 34. What is the penalty clause in the loan given to Antonio by Shylock? Answer: if Antonio fails to repay the loan within the specified time, Shylock will have the right to cut a pound of flesh from any part of Antonio's body. Question 35. What does the Prince of Morocco say to win the heart of Portia? Answer: the Prince of Morocco assures Portia of his love for her, saying that his blood is as red as any of Portia's other suitors, although his complexion is dark. Question 36. What is written on the golden casket? Answer: who chooses me shall gain what many men desire. Question 37. What is inscribed on the silver casket? Answer: on the silver casket, the words "who chooses me shall get as much as he deserves" were inscribed. Question 38. What is engraved on the leaden casket? Answer: who chooses me must give and hazard all he had, was engraved on the leaden casket. Question 39. Which casket did contain the picture of Portia? Answer: only the leaden casket contained the picture of Portia. Question 40. Which casket did the Prince of Morocco choose? Answer: the Prince of Morocco chose the golden casket. Question 41. What was the reason for the Prince of Morocco's choice of golden casket? Answer: the Prince of Morocco reasoned that the portrait of beautiful and worthy woman like Portia could not but be put in the most valuable casket like the golden casket. Question 42. What is found in the golden casket? Answer: a skull and a rolled up scroll in which the message "all that glitters is not gold" was inserted in the skull's empty eye were found. Question 43. Who was the second chooser? Answer: the Prince of Aragon was the second chooser. Question 44. What are the conditions set for the second choosing? Answer: in case of his failure to choose the right one, the Prince of Aragon will never disclose what he has chosen. He will never court another woman and leave Belmont immediately. Question 45. Which casket does the Prince of Aragon choose? Answer: the Prince of Aragon chooses the silver casket. Question 46. What is the reason for the Prince of Aragon's choosing the silver casket? Answer: the Prince of Aragon reads the inscription on the silver casket, "Who chooses me shall get as much as he deserves," and it leads him to choose it. Question 47. What is found inside the silver casket? Answer. Inside the silver casket, a portrait of a blinking idiot, a picture of fool's head is found. Question 48. Who is the third chooser? Answer. Bassanio, a Venetian lord, is the third chooser. Question 49. Which casket does Bassanio choose? Answer. Bassanio chooses the leaden casket, which contains the portrait of Portia. Question 50. Why does Bassanio choose the leaden casket? Answer. Bassanio has been warned by the background music not to judge a thing by its external appearance alone. Thank you friends for watching my video.